You're not worth the investment. My father said it in the hallway behind my sister's reception room, while my mother smoothed the edge of a white napkin like she was fixing something small instead of watching me come apart. That same night, I lost my bedroom at my parents' house, the last $4,200 I had saved, and the only key they had ever told me meant I still belonged there. Nobody said a word for me. What my parents did not know was that I already had a sealed blue envelope in my purse and proof they had not planned for. 6 weeks later, the truth came out in front of both families, my sister's new in-laws, our church elder, and the probate lawyer my grandmother had hired before she died. Have you ever had your own family act like your hurt was the inconvenience? My parents never cared about fairness as much as they cared about appearances. If a thing looked orderly from across the room, they could live with almost anything. Paige's wedding looked orderly. Cream roses, silver chargers, place cards in dark green ink. I know because I paid for part of it. I covered the floral balance, the rush linen fee, and the extra candle order when Paige changed her mind 3 times in 1 week. My mother promised reimbursement after the honeymoon. My father called it temporary support. At cocktail hour, I checked the escort board and saw my name missing from the family table. Not misplaced. Missing. Dana, the planner, came toward me too quickly and said, "There's a seat for you near the vendor's side." The table was beside the speakers and coffee station. 2 distant cousins were there, plus the photographer's assistant during her break. My parents were at the front table with Paige, her husband, his parents, the pastor, and my Aunt Louise. 1 chair at that table sat empty for almost 10 minutes. My chair. Nobody moved. That was the first moment I understood the wedding was not the event. It was the cover. I went to my mother first because daughters keep old habits longer than they should. She was folding and unfolding the napkin under the table. "Mom, my seat is gone." She looked once toward Paige's mother-in-law. "Not now. I paid for half this room. We're trying to keep things smooth," she said. That was avoidance. She did not deny what had been done. She only moved me out of sight. My father took me into the hallway by the ice machine. "You are making this day harder than it has to be," he said. "I'm asking why I'm not seated with my own family." "You know why." Then he said it. "You're not worth the investment." I remember my mother stepping into the hallway and not correcting him. I remember her looking at the flower invoice sticking out of my purse and then looking away. Nobody came after me. Not Paige, not my aunt, not my mother. I went back into the room because humiliation gets heavier when you carry it alone. I sat at the side table while Paige got applause, toasts, and a dance with my father. Paige looked calm in a way that told me she knew more than she planned to admit. She was never cruel in a loud way. She benefited quietly. Halfway through dinner, my phone lit up. It was a text from my mother. "Please don't do this tonight. We can discuss reimbursement after the honeymoon. Also, your room is being redone for the baby. Stay at the Fairfield if you need to." Paige was not even 12 weeks along, and I learned about the nursery from a text sent while I sat 15 feet from my family table. Then I looked up and saw my mother already watching me. She gave a tight little smile, the kind people use when strangers are close enough to notice. That was complicit silence. She let my father wound me. Then she organized the wound. I left after the cake cutting. In the parking lot, I opened the blue envelope my grandmother had pressed into my hand at the bridal shower 4 days earlier. "Keep this somewhere safe," she had said, "and don't give it to your father." Inside was a spare key to her lake cottage, a note in her shaky handwriting, and a business card for Daniel Halpern, her probate lawyer. The note was only 2 lines. "If they start moving things too quickly, call him. Do not hand over your receipts." At the time, I thought the envelope was about Grandma's health. I found out later it was about much more. When I drove to my parents' house to get an overnight bag, the garage code had been changed. My father opened the side door holding my old brass key. "We need some space after tonight," he said. "My room is gone. It's a nursery now. It's been 3 hours. We planned ahead." Upstairs, my room was stripped. The quilt my grandmother made me was folded on top of 2 trash bags. My closet was empty except for 3 wire hangers. That was not anger. That was preparation. My mother stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. "This is your sister's season," she said. "Don't make everything about you." Downstairs, a white florist box sat on the kitchen counter with my receipt clipped to it. Paid in full. $4,200. My card. My name. Pain had turned into proof. Before midnight, I was at a Fairfield Inn off Route 9 with bad coffee, a blinking voicemail light, and missed calls from everyone except my parents. Dana had called twice. So had Grandma's nurse. Paige called once and left a voicemail. "Can we just have peace for one day?" she said. Peace. That was the word people always used when they wanted me to carry the cost. Around 2 in the morning, I turned Halpern's card over again. On the back, in my grandmother's handwriting, was one more line. "You are not crazy. They have been preparing this. If they had done this to you, would you have walked back into that house again?" The next morning, the hotel coffee tasted burnt and metallic, and my feet still hurt from the wedding shoes I had not bothered to take off before I fell asleep across the bedspread. For a few hours, everything was quiet. I thought the worst had already happened. I was wrong. At 9:12, my father sent an email with the subject line, "Practical Next Steps." That was his language when he wanted cruelty to sound administrative. He wrote that since I had chosen to disrupt the reception, I would not be joining the post-wedding brunch. He also wrote that the money I had spent for flowers and linens would be considered a gift, unless I preferred to embarrass Paige by raising it with her new in-laws. At the bottom was an attachment titled, "Family Reimbursement Waiver," a waiver. The form said I acknowledged that any support I had provided for wedding expenses was voluntary, non-refundable, and given in affection to the bride. I forwarded the email to myself, printed it in the hotel business center, and added it to the blue envelope. Then I called my mother. "Mom, Dad sent me a waiver. We're trying to avoid more scenes. It says my money was a gift. You did help your sister. I was told I would be repaid." There was a pause. I could hear silverware and plates in the background. "This is not the day for that," she said. Strategic silence. She was speaking now, but only to redirect the room I could not see. I drove to my condo after that. I had been renting it out short-term while I spent weekends at my parents' house helping with Grandma and the wedding mess. The tenant had moved out 2 weeks earlier, which was the only reason I had somewhere to go. When I opened the front door, the place smelled like closed windows and cardboard. I stood there with the quilt over one arm and felt, for the first time since the reception, a little air move through my chest. Nobody had apologized. At least I was no longer trapped there. By noon, Dana called again. I took it, sitting on my kitchen floor. "I shouldn't be involved," she said. "But I heard enough last night that I think you need your invoices." "I already have copies." "Good." She told me my mother had asked, 3 days before the wedding, that my table assignment be changed to reduce tension. Dana had pushed back. My father stepped in and said, "Put her where she won't distract from the family." "Dana," said the banquet captain, and Paige both heard him. Humiliation had become logistical. "If your family had seated you like that after taking your money, would you have called it a mistake?" Later that afternoon, I went to see Grandma at the rehab wing, where she was recovering from pneumonia. Her nurse, Teresa, met me outside the room. "She's tired," Teresa said. "And your father was here earlier." Inside, Grandma looked smaller than she had at the shower. The church bulletin from Paige's wedding was on her tray table, unopened. When she saw me, she squeezed my fingers with more strength than I expected. "Did you call Halpern?" she asked. "Not yet. Call him if your father starts talking about efficiency." Efficiency, another family word for removal. I sat with her for almost an hour. Every time she woke, she asked whether I still had the key and the receipts. Before I left, she said one more thing. "Your mother knows." Around 4, my phone lit up with a text from Paige. "I know you're upset, but you have to see how bad your timing was. Dad said you made us look unstable." Made us look unstable. Not hurt me. Not lied to me. made us look unstable. Maybe Paige had lived inside my parents' version of reality so long that she no longer saw the edges of it. She was not innocent. She was comfortable. At 5:30, I got a call from Ruth, the longtime bookkeeper at my parents' hardware business. "I probably shouldn't say anything," she said. "That sentence has never led to anything small." Ruth told me my father had come in the week before the wedding, asking for copies of old reimbursements and one reserve account ledger tied to Grandma's lake cottage maintenance. Then she said something that changed the shape of the whole mess. "There was also an old trust schedule in the storage file," she said. "He wanted to know if anyone else had ever seen it." The room went still. I knew Grandma had a will. I had assumed everything else was simple. But a trust schedule was different. It meant structure, intent, paperwork my father wanted handled before anyone asked questions. I drove straight from rehab to the business storage office and found the back door locked. New keypad, new code. One more thing moved without telling me. I sat in my car with the envelope on the passenger seat and called Halpern's office. His assistant said he was in court and could return my call the next day. I gave my name. There was a short silence. Then she asked if I still had the blue envelope from my grandmother. That should have reassured me. It scared me instead. That night I opened the waiver on my laptop instead of my phone. At the bottom, in smaller type, there was one extra line. By accepting reimbursement accommodations from the family reserve, signer relinquishes future claim related to estate-supported property. Estate-supported property. The flowers were never just about the flowers. At 10:40, my father left a voicemail. "We have done more than enough," he said. "Do not make me regret trying to help you." If the money was tied to Grandma's estate, and the waiver was really about future claim, then my parents had not just humiliated me at the wedding. They had used the wedding to corner me. If your parents had done that, would you have signed just to keep the family from turning on you? 3 days passed before Daniel Halpern called me back. By then, I had moved my suitcase from room to room in my condo without really unpacking it, paid 2 overdue utility bills, and gone back to contract work for a medical office. Halpern asked me to meet him at his office above a pharmacy near the courthouse. He was neat, direct, and not impressed by drama. He looked at the blue envelope first, then at the receipts, then at the waiver. "Did you sign this?" he asked. "No." "Good." That one word gave me more relief than any apology I had received. He explained only what he was sure of. Grandma had updated certain estate documents 11 months earlier after a disagreement with my father about the lake cottage, reimbursement requests, and what he called family efficiencies. Halpern would not show me everything yet, but he told me enough to make one thing plain. My father was not tidying paperwork. He was trying to position control. After that meeting, I took my laptop to a diner, ordered a grilled cheese I barely touched, and made a clean folder of every document I had. Wedding invoice, waiver, my mother's reimbursement text, Dana's notes, Ruth's call summary, Grandma's note, the key. I labeled each item by date. That was when I stopped feeling like a daughter asking to be treated fairly and started feeling like a witness. Then my phone lit up. It was a group text from my mother, but I had clearly been added by mistake. "Paige, did she sign anything yet?" "Mom, not yet. Your father thinks pressure is better after the honeymoon. If Claire keeps pushing, remind her the transfer only works if she signs before the reading. Ruth still has the old trust schedule, which is a problem. Delete this." I stared at the screen until the server set down my check and asked if I was all right. That was the midpoint, not the wedding, not the waiver, the text, because in 12 seconds, it turned humiliation into premeditation. I screenshotted it, forwarded it to my private email, and sent a copy to Halpern before my hands even started shaking. Transfer. Before the reading. Old trust schedule. Problem. I had thought the lie was about reimbursement. It was only the first one. My father called 30 minutes later. "You're not worth the investment." The exact words. Again. This time they landed differently. Not as a judgment, as proof of a long pattern. a sentence he had probably been using in one form or another for years whenever he decided my labor, my loyalty, and my silence were cheaper than my dignity. "I'm not signing anything," I said. "This does not concern you." "It concerns me enough that Mom texted Paige about it." There was a silence on the line so complete I could hear the air conditioner in my car click on. Then he said, "Do not do this publicly." Family image. There it was again. Not denial. Not remorse. Containment. That afternoon, I met Ruth in the back booth of a diner 2 towns over. She brought a legal pad and a trembling kind of anger that looked like fear wearing sensible shoes. Ruth told me the reserve account attached to Grandma's cottage had been billed for repairs that never happened, then used to cover selected wedding vendor reimbursements routed through the business. Not all of them. Just enough to blur where the money came from. My father had repaid the company from one account, while asking me to waive claim from another. It was messy by design. He wanted overlap, Ruth said. Enough confusion that nobody would press too hard. That hurt more than I expected. My father used money like a tool. My mother used normal tone, clean paper, and timing. He closed doors. She kept people walking through the wrong ones. How do you keep going when the people who raised you only seem to value you when you make yourself smaller? I drove to the lake road instead of home and parked outside Grandma's cottage gate with the spare key in my hand. The place looked the same as it had when I was 12. Blue shutters, porch swing. My father had always spoken about that cottage as though it would naturally become part of Paige's growing family one day. More room for children, better use, easier transition, but that afternoon, I heard those phrases for what they were. Claims made early to make theft sound inevitable. I did not go inside. I just held the key and let the quiet settle. For the first time in weeks, I was not asking anyone to let me stay. I already had what I needed. I just had not trusted it. The next day, Teresa called from the rehab wing. Grandma had taken a turn. By the time I got there, my parents were already in the corridor outside her room. My father stepped into my path before I reached the door. "This is not the time," he said. "No," I said. "That was the wedding." My mother finally spoke. "Please, not here." Strategic again. Soft voice. Public hallway. She was not trying to protect Grandma. She was trying to protect the performance of concern. Halpern arrived 20 minutes later. My parents went still when they saw him. He asked Teresa and the charge nurse to witness that Grandma was alert enough to confirm she wanted no documents presented to her by my father without counsel present. Grandma nodded once. Clear enough. That changed everything in the corridor. My father stepped back. My mother sat down without speaking. For the first time in my life, authority had entered the family system from outside it. Not louder, stronger. Grandma died the following Tuesday. Paige called me that evening and cried harder than I expected. Then she said, "Can we please get through the funeral without any more damage?" Halpern's assistant called the next morning and said there would be an immediate family reading afterward because certain instructions could not wait. I looked at the blue envelope, the key, the printed text, and the folder of notes on my table. They had spent years teaching me to endure. They had forgotten that endurance can also look like record-keeping. The private room at Hawthorne Hall smelled like coffee, ham glaze, and lilies from the church arrangements carried over after the service. My father sat straight-backed beside my mother. Paige was there with her husband Nolan, and his parents sat just far enough away to seem respectful while still hearing everything. Mr. Klein stayed. Ruth arrived quietly and took a chair near the wall. Halpern and his paralegal had a blue legal folder on the side credenza beside the dessert plates. The folder never stopped pulling my eye. My mother noticed. She folded her napkin once, then again. The same gesture from the reception hallway. Avoidance had become anxiety. For the first 20 minutes, everyone performed grief in the approved family style. Small voices, controlled faces, ham left untouched. Paige thanked people for coming. My father spoke about devotion, legacy, and responsibility. He sounded the way men sound when they think a polished tone can outrun a record. I said very little. I had learned by then that silence works differently when you are no longer the only one carrying it. Then Nolan's mother leaned toward me and touched my wrist. Paige said the wedding was stressful, she said. In the careful way outsiders test the edge of a secret. I looked at the head table where my parents sat in a line of flowers and folded programs. It was useful, I said. Halfway through lunch, Halpern asked if the immediate family could remain after the guests started filtering out, because he had instructions related to the estate. My father answered before anyone else. We can handle paperwork privately this week. No, Halpern said. We cannot. That one word changed the temperature of the room. Outside family witnesses still lingered. Nolan's parents stayed. Mr. Klein stayed. Ruth stayed. Dana, the wedding planner, walked in 10 minutes later with a condolence card and stopped short when she saw me. My mother looked like she wanted to send everyone into the hallway at once. Not in front of them, she said under her breath to my father. There it was, the fear underneath everything. Not truth. Exposure. Halpern opened the blue folder and removed a short letter, copied statements, and a trust amendment. He did not read them yet. He only arranged them carefully on the table. Each object changed the air around it. My father turned to me. What exactly have you been telling people? Less than the documents do, I said. Paige looked between us, pale now in a way she had not been at the wedding. Maybe she had known enough to cooperate and not enough to imagine the paperwork could ever leave the family walls. That is the danger of growing up favored. You mistake protection for reality. Ruth spoke before anyone asked her to. I was asked to pull ledgers before the wedding, she said. My father's head snapped toward her. This is inappropriate. Ruth swallowed. It was already inappropriate. No one raised a voice. That made it worse. Halpern then explained plainly that Grandma had created a written record after concerns about pressure related to the lake cottage, reserve funds, and attempts to condition reimbursements on estate waiver language. He said there would be a formal process later, but there was already enough documented concern to freeze any transfer tied to the disputed property until review. Freeze any transfer. There it was. Not a fantasy ending. Just enough truth, properly held, to stop them. My mother finally tried the softer version. This is a misunderstanding, she said. That was her style when control started slipping. Not denial. Blur. Halpern set down one printed page. Then perhaps you can explain this text, he said. He slid the screenshot across the table. Paige covered her mouth. Nolan stared down at the paper. Mr. Klein removed his glasses. My father did not touch it. My mother did. Her fingers trembled once, then flattened the page, as though neatness might still save her. For a moment, no one spoke. That silence was different from the one at the wedding. This silence belonged to them. Dana, still holding the condolence card, said quietly, I heard your seating conversation too. My father looked at her like he had forgotten service workers, stayed in rooms after the family stopped seeing them. That was always one of his weaknesses. He noticed status. He did not notice witnesses. The proof chain was no longer mine alone. Receipt, waiver, ledger, text, witness, lawyer. My mother turned to me then, and for the first time since the reception, I saw something close to fear in her face. We were trying to keep the family together, she said. Maybe she believed that. Maybe women like my mother live so long inside, controlled men, that rearranging harm starts to feel like caregiving. I still do not know whether her silence came more from fear or agreement. I only know it worked for her right up until it didn't. My father pushed back his chair. This is not the place. But the place was exactly the point. A private lie had become a social fact. Nolan's father asked, very carefully, whether Claire had been asked to waive a property claim in exchange for repayment of wedding costs. Nobody answered quickly enough. That delay did more damage than any speech could have. Halpern placed one more item on the table, a folded sheet in Grandma's handwriting. She asked that this be read with witnesses present if there was resistance, he said. My father stood up fully then. Absolutely not. He sounded calm. That made it worse. Halpern did not look at him. He looked at me. Would you like me to continue now? he asked. This was not a plea for courage. By then, courage had nothing to do with it. The truth was already in the room, sitting between the coffee cups and the untouched pie plates, waiting to be said out loud. I looked at the folded page. I looked at the extra chair beside the wall where mourners had almost sat and then moved away. It reminded me of the wedding table. The family always made room for appearance first, people second. Can you feel that moment when the room knows the truth before anyone admits it? Can parents really claim they were protecting the family when what they were protecting was their control? Halpern read my grandmother's letter in a calm voice that did not rise even once. She wrote that she had become concerned the previous summer when my father began referring to the lake cottage as Page's future place while she was still alive and paying every tax bill herself. She wrote that she had learned I covered wedding expenses after being told repayment would come from family reserve funds, and that any attempt to tie my reimbursement to estate language was to be treated as coercive. First came the letter, then came the numbers. Halpern laid out the statements Ruth had flagged. Reserve account transfers, vendor reimbursements. Then he placed my floral receipt beside the waiver and turned both pages so Nolan's parents and Mr. Klein could see the line about relinquishing future claim related to estate-supported property. The amount sat there in black print, $4,200, small enough for a family to pretend it was manageable. Ugly enough for everyone in the room to understand exactly what had been done. Page whispered, "Mom." Halpern was not finished. He lifted the trust amendment next. Grandma had signed it 11 months earlier with 2 witnesses and a notary after meeting him without my parents present. Under the amendment, the lake cottage did not pass to my parents for later distribution. It went directly to me, along with a maintenance reserve set aside specifically so no one could force a rushed sale or claim it was too impractical to keep. That was the deeper reversal. The cottage my father had been repositioning as Page's future family place was never his to promise. It was mine. My father finally found his voice. This was done under stress. Teresa, still in her funeral black, spoke from the doorway before anyone else could. Grandma's nurse had been invited by Mr. Klein because Grandma had asked for her by name during her last week. "No," Teresa said. She was very clear. That was the witness my parents never saw coming, though she had been there from the start. Hallway conversations, rehab room visits, my father speaking too freely in front of people he ranked too low to matter. Halpern nodded to her, then read the final paragraph of Grandma's letter. She wrote that I had been treated as useful for too long, and that usefulness was not the same as love. She wrote that if there was conflict after her death, I was to have immediate possession of the cottage key already provided to me, and that any family member trying to condition payment, access, or lodging on my silence was to be considered in bad faith. My father looked at me then with the same cold expression he had worn at the reception. "You're not worth the investment." The exact words. The third time. But now they fell into a room full of paper, witnesses, and people outside the family system. They did not land on me. They landed on him. Nobody defended him. Not my mother, not Paige, not even Nolan, who kept his eyes on the table like a man suddenly reviewing every story he had been told about us. Mr. Klein cleared his throat. "That is not a sentence a father should say here," he said. My mother finally tried to move toward me, voice soft, controlled. "Late. We can talk privately." "No," I said. Dana set the condolence card down beside the dessert plates and quietly confirmed the seating change discussion at the wedding. Ruth confirmed the ledger requests. Teresa confirmed Grandma's concern about pressure. Halpern stated he had sufficient cause to maintain the freeze, preserve the records, and proceed formally through review. Paige cried then, but even that did not make the room turn back toward her. I watched her realize, maybe for the first time, that being favored did not mean being safe. It only meant being used differently. I reached into my purse and set the spare cottage key on the table before closing my hand around it again. Brass, warm from my palm. I did not yell. I did not list every hurt. I did not explain my childhood to people who had watched enough already. "I'll work through Halpern from here on out," I said. Not through either of you. My father started to answer. My mother touched his sleeve for the first time all afternoon. Strategic silence again. Too late, but still hers. I picked up my folder, the key, and Grandma's letter copy. On my way out, I passed the extra chair near the wall. Empty, waiting. It looked too much like the chair at the wedding, except now I understood something I had missed then. I had not been excluded because I was small. I had been excluded because I was in the way. Outside, the parking lot air was cold enough to wake me fully. For a minute, I stood beside my car and listened to the sounds coming faintly through the hall doors. Just the low murmur of people forced to sit with the version of the family they had worked so hard to hide. My mother called my name once before I reached the driver's door. I turned. Her mascara had held. Her voice had not. "We did what we thought was necessary," she said. Maybe that was true. Maybe my father always called control responsibility, and maybe my mother called compliance peace because it sounded cleaner in her mouth. I still think she knew more than Paige ever did. I did not go back inside. I drove to the lake road instead. By sunset, I was standing on the cottage porch with the key in the lock and Grandma's letter folded in my coat pocket. The swing creaked once when the wind shifted. Inside, the room smelled like cedar and old books. My quilt was on the back seat. I carried it in myself. My parents finally knew the truth could leave the family table and survive. I still do not know whether my father regrets trying to take what was never his, or whether my mother regrets staying quiet until quiet stopped working. I only know that some families do not lose the dependable child when they hurt her. They lose her when everyone else finally sees it.